Welcome to another Kundalini After Dark session. I'm your host, Brent Spirit, here on Zoom with 14 other community members. We've got a few tuning in on YouTube as well. Thank you all so much for joining us live tonight to talk about how long Kundalini awakening takes. If you're listening to the recording in the archive, you can join us for the next Kundalini After Dark meeting. You can visit brentspirit.com/afterdark to register. The link is in the description, along with the links to a bunch of other free things, courses, audiobooks, ebooks, all sorts of things that I have available there. Check it all out. It's all there for you. If you're tuning in on Spotify and you could leave a rating for the show, I'd really appreciate that. If you did already, thank you so much. It goes a long way. I appreciate all of your engagement, all of your comments, likes, subscribes, all of that stuff. It goes a long way to help me to spread the word about Kundalini awakening. Thank you all so much. So today we're talking about how long Kundalini awakening takes. So I'll share some of my thoughts on this topic. And before we get into that, I want to remind you here that, I don't have all the answers. I'm just here to start some conversations, to share my thoughts and get, open the floor for your take as well. I want to hear from you. I want to hear, maybe you disagree with me. Maybe you've got some of your own ideas, your own insights. Maybe you want to complain and vent about how long this process has taken. That's what we're here for. Maybe you've got some questions about Kundalini awakening in general, about the spiritual path in general. You can ask your questions and I'll open the floor for some of our members here today to respond. So if you got some responses, we'd love to hear from you as well. We can take our conversation in any direction. Really, it's nothing really off limits here. The topic, of course, is how long Kundalini awakening takes, but we can go off and see where our conversation goes. So let's dive into my notes here. Of course, this question, how long does Kundalini awakening take? How long does Kundalini process take? I'm sure you must have gathered by now, there's many nuances to such a question, many nuances to anything that could possibly answer such a question. So I'll share some sort of quantifiable measurements of time, if you will, to satisfy the rational mind, to satisfy the part of us that wants some structure, some answers, some numbers. So we'll talk a little bit about years and things like that, how long it might take. But in another sense, we can look at this question of how long does Kundalini awakening take, and we can consider that it's similar to asking, how long does life take? It's like so many different ways of answering such a question, right? So there's nothing really set in stone per se here. We're just having some conversations about this because, of course, many people that are going through this have this question: how long is this really going to be, right? How long did it take other people, right? Can I go through this challenging process for much longer? I don't know, right? When is it going to get to the good stuff or the calm stuff? When is this intensity going to end? Or maybe it's amazing. Sometimes people hear that all the amazing stuff sometimes gets pretty quiet and they get kind of concerned. Well, how long is it going to be amazing for, right? How much more time do I have to enjoy this, really expanded state of consciousness? So the idea of time comes up, of course, and it's reasonable. It's completely reasonable. So this idea of, how long does Kundalini awakening take? Well, that also begs the question of like, well, what are we using to measure the end of Kundalini awakening or Kundalini process, right? What is the measure, right? Of course, we talk about the end of Kundalini as shared in yoga, right? Being self-realization or enlightenment, right? But of course, those terms virtually impossible to define in words, right? Which makes it all the more confusing, right? How do we know when we're there if we haven't yet got there, or we don't know if we're there yet? How do we know if this process is going to keep going, how much longer and whatnot, right? So it's very, very confusing, right? But like I said, usually when people are asking how long does Kundalini awakening take, they're really trying to discern how long the challenging purification period might be, how long the dark night of the soul might be, all that sort of challenging period on the path, right? So beyond those parts of the journey, I've noticed a pattern. It seems that on the other side of the intense purification, on the other side of those really significant major dark nights of the soul, there's a period where things get calm. It's a period where things get stable, right? And so could we say that's self-realization? Perhaps. Could we say it's enlightenment? Perhaps. But of course, even enlightenment, self-realization, there's various stages, various degrees of embodiment and integration. So it gets all confusing. So a term came to me to sort of define this period after the intensity, after this turbulence, after the intense ups and downs. And that term was relative stability, right? So how long does it take for us to get to relative stability? These are some of the things we'll talk about today. And so this idea of relative stability, right? I said that it's relative because it's, it's not absolute, it's not fixed. There's some room for ups and downs. There's some breathing room. There's some buffer period there, right? So we can say, hey, I'm relatively stable, which means to me, I'm not going through intense purging or an intense dark night of the soul. I'm feeling pretty stable, feeling pretty grounded, feeling like I'm moving towards deeper and deeper integration and embodiment. I can get back into the world and not feel so awkward or clunky or scared. I'm relatively stable, right? My state of consciousness is relatively stable. Does that mean that we'll never have another dark night of the soul or that we'll never purge anything ever again? No. These things come and go, right? Challenges come and go. For anybody at life, right? Anybody in life, things are going to get hard at some point or another, right? So I like this term relative stability, right? It's a very sort of loose term that we can use to define, some of these more advanced stages of the path. Now, of course, I can understand if some want to push back against that term, right? Language is very important. Definitions are very important, especially when we're speaking about something like this, right? We're trying to map it out. We're trying to create some sort of structure and some sort of rational understanding about this. So I understand if some of my terms are a little bit too watered down and vague for your liking right now. And if you want to talk about it, we can. But that's just something that came to me, and it served me pretty well, at least on this path. So let's get into a little bit of like I said, the stuff, the quantifiable measurements of time, the rational material here. So based on my research, based on my personal experience, and based on the countless conversations I've had with many others that have been going through Kundalini awakening process, I would say that to go through the intense purification, the dark nights of the soul, the intense ups and downs, to get to a point of relative stability, if you make it to relative stability in about 1 year since the beginning of your process, that is extremely fast, like really rock star level speed, about 1 year, right? 5 years seems to be about average, right? 5 years, 10 years or more, very common, right? Very common as well. Right? So those are just a bit of some numbers to share, right? 1 year, very fast. 5 years, about average. 10 years, pretty common, right? But I've heard people that have been going through this ups and downs intensity for decades, right? And we'll talk about why that is and how we can sort of quote unquote speed things up or avoid having it drag on unnecessarily, right? So before we get into that, of course, just remember here that, it's not a race, right? The pace it's an organic process. Like the seasons, right? They last as long as they last. They don't have to, begin and end on a specific calendar day per se, right? This is nature that we're talking about, Mother Nature, right? It doesn't fit into boxes, categories. So we can use categories to understand at times, right? So what are some of the factors for people that go through this process rather quickly? Well, I would say that it's people that have been doing a lot of their shadow work prior to the beginning of this very obvious Kundalini process. So they may have been doing lots of just general trauma healing, maybe doing a lot of journaling, a lot of meditation, these types of things, right? Maybe they've been in therapy for a long time. They've just been doing their shadow work. And then at a certain point, suddenly they find themselves in Kundalini awakening process. And because a lot of their, a lot of the groundwork of their emotional and psychological healing has been taken care of, the energy can move through the system rather quickly, right? As well, they may have also just come from much less traumatic backgrounds than others. So there's not much in the way of emotional or psychological material that needs to be cleared in order for their nervous system to be able to feel safe enough to relax deeply into, a deep state of meditation, right? So there are some who fortunately haven't had such an intense background of trauma compared to others. So this is a factor to consider as well, right? Some who move through this very quickly, they also may naturally embrace themes like surrender, self-love, humility, and they approach the process with trust, with a sense of faith, as opposed to fear. Maybe that comes naturally to them based on their disposition, their personality, based on how they were raised, based on their life experiences. These things maybe feel natural and easy for them to get on board with, right? Compared to others, right? Those who go through this process very quickly, they also are open to seeking guidance, right? They're open to learning. They're humble. They're curious, right? They feel safe enough to open up and say, hey, I need some help. I'm looking for some support, as opposed to suppressing, denying, shutting this process down, or avoiding it because they don't feel yet ready, right? There's also another factor to consider here, which is, of course, previous lifetimes of experience, right? Previous lifetimes of experience. Now, maybe you don't necessarily buy into this idea. I completely understand. It's pretty far out, but hey, Kundalini itself is pretty far out, right? There's something to be said that, if we have spent lifetimes engaging in spiritual work, naturally, that process, that progress carries over to some degree, I would argue to a very high degree, into the next lifetime. And then, we could pick up where we left off, in a sense, and accelerate through some of the stages of the spiritual path rather quickly. So that's something to consider as well, right? So some factors for, what may make a slower awakening process, right? Like say those processes that maybe take 10 years or more before a person reaches a point of relative stability, right? So these people, they may have not engaged in any shadow work, any healing work, any trauma work, anything like that, right? Suddenly they go through a Kundalini awakening because they went to a yoga class just to kind of stretch their body, or their friend dragged them there or something. And now they have a massive Kundalini awakening, right? Maybe they did some psychedelics or something at a festival, right? They're not interested in shadow work. And now this energy is moving through their system, right? So now their healing process has begun. Now their trauma work has begun. And it may be beginning and carrying itself out against their will, without their active participation or cooperation, right? So that makes it, there's so much friction there, so much resistance perhaps there, that just makes it drag on, right? Right. So some people have no spiritual background. So the idea of some energy moving through their body that's like called the divine mother, goddess Shakti, is just like completely ridiculous, right? And so they may just shut it out, understandably. I mean, quite reasonable, right? So they can shut it out for years, This can happen. Others may feel, I'm going through something valid, but I don't know who to turn to. I feel very lost, isolated. So for whatever reason, that also causes them to experience a lot of friction and tension on their path, which can slow things down. Sometimes people, for example, they go through an intense spiritual emergency, right? They get a particular diagnosis, and with that diagnosis, perhaps they are medicated. And some medications can be very effective to quell some of these very intense Kundalini phenomena. However, of course, they do suppress the process in general, causing it to drag on a bit longer, right? So I'm not against medication, and this, of course, isn't medical advice or anything. I'm just sharing what I've gathered based on conversations with many people about this process. So these are some other things that can take place. So another thing that can really suppress this process is alcohol, right? So for myself, I sat to meditate when I was feeling anxious and depressed. I didn't really have much of an interest in spirituality. I believe I was actually, I called myself an atheist at this time, but I heard, the scientific literature is saying meditation is effective for calming anxiety and, soothing depression. So I said, let me try this thing. I'm really desperate. Then, I experienced some spontaneous Kriyas, and that was the beginning of my Kundalini awakening process, though I didn't know it at the time. Well, I'm 15 years old, right? So on the weekends, I would go out and I would drink beers with my friends and party. And I look back and I realized that what I was doing with the alcohol was likely suppressing this process and not allowing it to really blossom. Now, for better or for worse, perhaps on some level, my recreational alcohol use was beneficial for that young 15-year-old, 16-year-old kid going through this process. Because maybe if this really took off when I was 15 or 16, I wouldn't have been able to handle it at all. So maybe on some level, the way things unfolded was, how it was meant to unfold. But for many years, after that initial awakening experience with the Kriyas, in my meditation, I didn't really know any quote unquote Kundalini phenomena. When I look back, I note that it was pretty quiet. And so I think the alcohol may have played a big role in that. So that's one thing to consider as well. It all depends on what we're putting in our body. We could put things in that support this process, that help it, that allow it to thrive, or we can do things that kind of calm it down a bit. So something to consider there. Sometimes people can recognize, they're going through a very profound spiritual awakening process. And they know and they see other people are talking about, you know, bliss and love and connection and abundance and finding their purpose. And that can on paper feel very, very exciting to some people, but in reality in the nervous system it's very scary because it may be so unfamiliar to them, right? This idea of unconditional love or feeling worthy or being, on their purpose, it can feel very scary. And so they may on some level self-sabotage. They may say, I'm not worthy of that, so let me do something that's going to sort of stop this process or shut it down or just avoid it, suppress it, bottle it up. Right. So this happens to people as well. We see this in many dimensions of life. Sometimes people, who knows, maybe their relationships are advancing or their career is advancing. And on some level, they get scared. They say, I'm not worthy of that. And so they self-sabotage, right? This can happen also in the spiritual domain too, right? On the other hand, sometimes people can delay the process by actively engaging in forceful practices to try and speed things up, right? So maybe they go and they start doing a bunch of psychedelics or a bunch of intense breath work. It can definitely influence the process, but can cause a lot of turbulence and cause a person to potentially get burnt out or get a lot of stuff coming up all at once, which forces them to go into denial or suppression out of just necessity. It can also just cause a person to just if you keep engaging in that stuff, it can really drag this process on longer than necessary, right? It's like it's just, doing too much in a sense. So this could be another way that we actually delay the process, adding too much fuel to the fire. So some things to consider there as well. So ultimately, my take is a very passive approach, as you must have gathered by now, is I don't think that we need to engage in this really intense active practices to speed this process up. I think if we just take a more passive approach, we surrender to the intelligence of Kundalini, acknowledging her as a very efficient surgeon, healer, teacher, guide, mentor, leader, right? Pilot, however you would like to think of her. She's very efficient, right? She knows the fastest, best ways and routes for us that, won't necessarily burn us out, right? So I trust in her, and that's my take. If you want to move fast, give it over to the pilot who knows the terrain, who knows exactly how to get there in the most efficient way, right? Rather than trying to force things with our ego, right? As well, it's important to think about this process in as large of units of time as you possibly can. So sometimes people begin going through this, and I've met with many people like this. They say, a few weeks ago, this happened to me. How long is it going to be? And they're expecting by the end of the month or the summer or, whatever it is, that they're going to be like, it's going to be over and they can just kind of get back to their life and continue in the way that they were. And I have to kind of tell them like, hey, like this is not like a week long, 2 week, 6 months process. Like this is the rest of your life now. And that doesn't mean that it's going to be intense ups and downs for the rest of your life. It's not going to be intense purging and purification for the rest of your life. But this process doesn't end. It just keeps going. Consciousness has no limit. It just keeps going. It's evolution. Evolution never stops. It just keeps going, right? So we want to try and zoom out and not look at it in just these small units like weeks or months, years at least. But even just take a step back and think about this 5 years from now, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, right? It gives us a bit more of a chance to breathe and say, hey, there's no rush. This is going to impact your life and what you make of your life and what you're here to do for the rest of it, right? So in 20 years, what you'll be doing will have something to do with your Kundalini awakening process that you're going through today, right? Where you end up, your work, your service, your relationships, your gifts to the world, it's all going to have something to do with your Kundalini awakening process that you're going through today, right? So think about that, 20 years, right? 30 years, 40 years, however long you want to think about it. I started thinking about it actually in terms of lifetimes, right? So throughout my process, I began to have some memories coming up of previous lifetimes in which I recognized I was engaging in a very intense spiritual practice. So I look back and I say, that practice continued over into this lifetime. That's great. Well, thank the previous incarnation for all that work that they did. I appreciate it. And then I think, well, that means what I'm doing here is going to carry over into not only 10, 20, 30 years into this lifetime, but the next lifetime as well. So now I'm actually working to better that next character, right? To position them in a better place to, move ahead on their journey towards total liberation or towards service, however I would like to think about it at the time. So it helps to zoom out as far back as you can, right? It gives you a lot of a higher perspective. It gets you out of feeling like you're a victim if things are going really hard, gets you out of feeling sort of attached to a particular character or a particular period in time or a particular life situation. You can look at it from a much, much broader place. So something to consider there. Another thing that I've noticed is that, I meet with many people and they tell me, I've been going through this for 2 years, 5 years, 6 months, 3 weeks, whatever it is. And in virtually every case, if I do a little bit of prodding, a little bit of poking and I ask them some questions, it turns out that they've been going through this process much longer than they originally thought, right? So they look back and they say, oh yeah, when I was a teenager, this one thing happened to me, or when I was a kid, this happened to me, or some interesting experiences have always kind of like, uh, punctuated their life here and there. And so we zoom out and we see, yeah, you haven't been going through this just for a year or 6 months or two weeks. It's actually sometimes in the case, like, and sometimes it's I hear from people and we conclude that they've been going through this for like 20 years and they may have thought they were only going through it for like, 6 months. And so there's different ways of looking at it in this way. Even for myself, once I began doing this work here as Brent Spirit, I thought that my Kundalini awakening process began when I was 23. So I was putting out videos and I was saying, I've been going through this whole process for like 5 years or whatever. Depends when I was putting out those videos. Then one day it hit me. I'm like, no, this was happening to me when I first sat to meditate, like I described. At age 15, my spine started to move. I was experiencing spontaneous Kriyas. I've been going through this for much longer than I thought, right? So I had to zoom out and see, like I have, this has been a big part of my life. I just didn't know. And I met many people like that. I just interviewed Ken Marks on my channel. You could check it out. And he describes a very similar story. He says he knew he was going through Kundalini awakening for 6 years. But when he looks back, he says, I've been going through this for 16 years, right? So it gives you a lot more confidence in the process. It can contextualize your life as well, right? You can put some of the pieces together, some of those puzzle pieces, and make sense of your journey and see how things have been laid out. Some things have been destined. There's some synchronicity, some order to your life that's been, placed without you even knowing. Some things you've experienced that were key moments in your life. Maybe you didn't even register yet, right? So I still have memories like this coming up for me sometimes when I look back at my life and I say, oh yeah, this happened, that happened. Oh, that makes sense now, right? So just some other ways of looking at it. Another thing to consider here is that we are going through an accelerated period of awakening on the planet, right? I know that this is a very common thing in the New Age community, right? There's an ascension taking place. There's an accelerated period of awakening, right? We're in a new age, right? Of course, I'm fully on board with this idea. If we look at what's happening on the planet with the internet and whatnot, like people are able to find the next piece of their puzzle very quickly and move through it very quickly, compared to in the past, it seems. So yes, it may be very challenging for you. It may be a very challenging period for you at this time. And it could be feeling like it's dragging on for way too long. And I'm there with you. I understand. I've been through my own very difficult periods that I felt were dragging on for way too long as well. But let me offer some perspective. Fortunately, we're not going through it in a period where, we don't have the internet, where we don't have books, right? We could have been going through this process during a period in history where the world was not as connected. Perhaps we were in some sort of society that did not acknowledge this. Maybe they even, executed people for claiming to be going through something like this or whatever it is, right? All of that would just drag this process on for way, way too long. So fortunately, we are in the best time period ever to go through this, perhaps. Of course, that can be argued. I'm sure some people would say, some time in ancient Egypt or something maybe was better. I don't know, but you get what I mean here. We're very fortunate. We're very fortunate. Could take much, much longer, right? In the past, maybe if you wanted to go find somebody to talk to about this, you'd have to take a camel or walk through the mountains or something. I don't know. And then maybe hopefully you'd find somebody and maybe hopefully you'd speak their language and they'd be able to kind of understand you and give you something. And that was all a big gamble. Now we can just, come on Zoom and connect with a bunch of people like we're doing now. It's a pretty incredible time. So fortunately, we can move through this a lot faster because of that. Another thing to consider here is, our age. This can be a theme that comes up for many people as well. I like to, like I said, think in terms of multiple lifetimes. So if we put in work in a previous lifetime, that can carry over into this lifetime, right? So we can experience significant leaps in our awakening rather quickly, very young, for example. As well, sometimes um, the fruits of our previous lifetime's work begin to show themselves much later in a subsequent lifetime. So maybe you were a great, great advanced yogi in a previous lifetime. Well, in this lifetime, maybe you get to, in your middle age or 60s or 70s before those fruits of your previous lifetime's work really begin to reveal themselves. And when they reveal themselves, it can happen very quickly, maybe even, in an instant, overnight, even. So some things to consider here as well, right? There's just so many different factors. So we shouldn't look at it with too small of a lens. We should try and zoom out to get a bit more perspective. Okay. So we want to avoid rushing. We also want to avoid delaying the process with self-sabotage or with engaging in unnecessary things to speed it up too much. Right. So finding the balance there, engaging in the practices that we've talked about so much, right? Surrender, trust, self-care, right? Meditation, community, taking care of the body, stretching, right? Finding a safe container to go into when we're going through periods of purification or dark nights of the soul, right? Going into our safe container and holding ourselves through anything that may arise. This is how we move through things very efficiently on this path. So those are some of my thoughts on how long Kundalini awakening takes. I hope I've offered you some value and some perspectives to think about. I'm going to open the floor up. I want to hear from all of you as well about your thoughts on this. How long has it been going for you? How do you feel about that? Right? Maybe you've got some ideas to share on this topic as well for others who may have this question. Maybe you've got some questions about Kundalini in general. You can ask the group. We'll see if anyone has some responses for you. Maybe you want to share about something interesting that you've gone through recently. We'd love to hear from you. So I'll open the floor up in a second, but first, I want to invite you to check out all the links in the description. Got lots of free stuff there. We've also got kundaliniawareness.org, completely free website. Got a directory of licensed mental health professionals. We've got a collection of stories of people that are going through Kundalini awakening that you can read about. We've got some peer support groups, a few listed there as well. Got some books, some videos. Check it all out. kundaliniawareness.org. And brentspirit.com. I've got some free courses there. I've got a free course, Kundalini Awakening Fundamentals. You can check it out. And so let's open the floor up here. This is Kundalini After Dark. Let's hear from Colin.
Hey, Brent.
Hey, Colin.
Hey, do you think it's more like stabilization? Do you think it's more just getting used to the whole process?
Yeah, that's a
You
good
know
way
what I
to put
mean?
it. Yeah, it's a good way to put it. I've also described it as kind of learning how to surf the waves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm just gonna, my attitude now is just like it's with me. I'm not looking for a beginning or an end. No, I'm
Hmm.
just I'm just trying to navigate it the best I can and trying to like integrate it into this I don't know, this lifetime, this experience, you know. Needless to say, I'm very challenged doing that, but I don't see an end in sight. I don't see anything like that. And so many, well, not so many, but the teachers I trust definitely believe it's an ongoing process. And even I was in a meeting with Tara Springett like over a year ago, and she was saying how like she's been on the trip for decades now, and she's had many periods during those decades with big upheavals. What's the right word? Big events related to Kundalini, and she says she expects that to continue for the rest of her life. I think she's had like two or three
Hmm.
big, that have spanned decades. And I don't know. Yeah, I just see this as my new normal, as normal as it is.
Yeah.
Uh,
It's a really healthy perspective to take.
Trying.
Maybe you're inspiring some thought for me. Let me see if I can articulate it. Our reaction to the ups and downs, perhaps that stabilizes, but the ups and downs don't.
Yeah. Yeah. How to handle them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
something like that.
Oh, and
Yeah.
I had another question. It's a little off topic with this, but well, maybe it isn't because it pertains, I guess it's pertaining to your personal ups and downs with it and your personal experience with it. But you were saying you in the last meeting you were talking about processing some stuff had come up for you recently. And you were talking about safety.
Mhm.
And I'm curious if you could elaborate on that a little more.
Yeah. Yeah.
What you mean by safety on this process, or just safety in general.
Yeah. So the past month or so, I've been taking a really deep dive into this idea of feeling safe. And I've, on some level, equated that to uh, well-being, healthy behavioral patterns. And without safety, we lack well-being, and our behavioral patterns tend to move in towards in an unhealthy direction unless we have really strong values that prevent us from engaging in, unhealthy coping mechanisms and whatnot. So I essentially, that's this term safety, and I boiled it down to like the nervous system. If it feels safe, you can trust, you can relax, you can be curious, you can explore, you can meditate, you can close your eyes, you can be vulnerable. And if you're not safe, well, then none of those things are a good idea, right? If you feel like you're under threat, closing your eyes and relaxing, like that's like the last thing you want to do. So I started to kind of look around other people, started to look at my own self, and I said, okay, it's all comes down to feeling safe. And so I told myself, hey, Brent, by the way, did you know that we're completely safe now? Totally safe. Nobody's coming to hurt you or harm you or criticize you or judge you or anything. You're totally safe. I said this to myself, and it washed over my nervous system like this shakti, this relaxation sort of um, just washed over me. And so then it inspired me to go in and kind of do some deeper shadow work, therapeutic work, to explore where are the parts of me that are holding on to this feeling of being unsafe that I need to update. I need to give them a firmware update. I need to give them a news update and say, hey, we're safe now. That's something that's past, that's over. And so in doing so, certain things have been coming up from my past to be received and to get that update. So that's some of the stuff I've been processing. Fortunately, at this point in my journey, I'm well aware of what's happening. I know what this is. I know what this process looks like. And so I'm not feeling victimized by it. I'm not scared of it. I'm actually doing my very best not to avoid, suppress, deny, ignore, put off for later. I'm saying, okay, I see what's happening. I'm going to move really into it. And I start stacking all of my practices, right? Everything I can do. I meditate in many different ways and I turn to God and I pray and I'm reading about therapy and psychology, all that kind of stuff. I'm doing my own therapy work. I'm engaging in everything I can to just cultivate safety and to process whatever's coming up. So that's very different than how I may have done it in the past. In the past, I may have not even known that this is a healing process, or I may have been, yeah, this is healing, but I don't want to do it. I'm scared. So now I just like very much on board with it. And so that's why I feel like I'm able to move through rather quickly without any feeling of victimhood, without it getting super intense. Now, I do know that things are going to get very intense for me. Like you were saying when you're speaking about Tara Springer, for example, it's going to happen, right? I'm young. People are going to die in my life. Things are going to change, right? The political situation is going to change. The economy is going to change. Anything can happen, and it's going to happen. I would be a fool to think that everything's just going to be smooth sailing from here on out. Those things are coming. Like uncomfortable things are coming for me. I just intend that when they arise, I turn to my practices and say, okay, how can I work with this instead of getting caught up in the waves? How can I surf them a little bit? So that's my take on this, at least at this point in my life. And I can even say, hey, at some point things may get so intense, I may forget that there's even such a thing as surfing. I may say to hell with the spiritual path. I may go deep deep, dark, underground, under the water. That's okay too. It's part of the path. It's part of the process. But I hope I kind of got to your question there, Colin.
No, totally. That's awesome. No, it's great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you for asking. It's a great one. And I think part of my personal selfish reason for even doing this type of work is it just like keeps me in the game. Like it's like like I gotta like remember what this is all about because I think maybe if I went into you know, just not talking about this stuff, I may be more likely to forget what this process is all about. Maybe, I don't know. But being so steeped in it by doing this work, I feel like it keeps me sharp in a sense. But I I, I probably will get humbled at some point. You know, it probably it's just gonna happen. And hopefully on the other side of that it works out for me, but we'll see. Thanks, Colin.
Thank you, Brent.
Let's go over here to Mahar.
Hi, this is a great topic. I've also been reflecting, when did it really start? Because I wasn't really aware of some of the terms, either like Kriya and Kundalini. I think I just explored it after I actually saw your channel. But I've been thinking about the parallel, or like even the crossing of a spiritual emergency or a trauma or nervous or mental breakdown be all a part of it. And I'm trying to remember what was the real trigger. And I think in my life, it started very early on. I think I stumbled upon Rajni Shosho at like 15. I read a book and I was like, oh, I get this, whatever he's talking about, meditation. Oh yeah, sure. Like this is great. And I would discuss it with my cousin. And I just came from a family of professors, very Vivekanand. So it wasn't like outrageous, like, you have this energy, you have all of that. But I think there was a sense of, integrity and right is right, wrong is wrong, even as a child that I had. And then I forgot about it. Like, okay. And then at 19, I had a similar situation, a trauma again, like deep going into Bhagavad Gita. So it also, for me, like looking at that, like just thinking about it today, also while the session started, it felt like it was more about wanting agency while not having it, and then fighting for it and knowing that I needed it. But then so many people don't know they have agency. They don't have agency, but then they do tend to live a passive life. Society says we do this, that's that. I became very counterculture from the early on. And I think it was always about that, it was always about that. Like, it was always about, like, there's more to my life than being defined by my trauma. There's more to my life being defined by what happened to me or what happened in my family. But when you look around, no one has not had family trauma. Like, everyone has had a very difficult, it's very common. You have family, you're going to have issues. So I think it just became a fight of agency because there was more resistance. So because of that more resistance, there was more fight and there was more seeking of the freedom. And then just a few years ago, when I did come across transcendental meditation, like you said, right, scientific, and feeling that I don't know if I believe in God. I don't know if he even exists, he, she, like, I don't know what it all is about, but I want to feel better. I don't want depression or anxiety in my life. And I had my first experience, which I believe at that point I didn't make sense of, but later on I realized that was the peak, like that was the light, the darkness, and completely changed after that, but trying to make sense of it. But it wasn't just physical, like, okay, now you're questioning everything in your life. You want to change. And I started learning everything without having to read anymore. Like the reading of anything spiritual, anything profound, from Carl Jung to Lao Tzu, was more of a confirmation or a guiding light wherever I was stuck. But I was reading less to solve my problems, observing more, introspecting more. And it does feel like that it's never ending, but it somehow also feels like some people might just be continuing a journey from the past life. That's what it started to feel to me. And then that, I've always looked up to the younger self, who sat through a lot and also like meditated. I started meditating at 15 as well. Just got so curious about breath, about laughter, about silence. Very intrigued, but I sometimes feel jealous of that kid because that kid was suppressing aggression and anxiety just to get through. And now I get irritated very fast, like something small happens. So I think it's just been like figuring out when did it really start. And now it feels like it doesn't matter, because that stability piece that you're talking about, it does come with accepting some principles. Like, okay, these are the principles I'm going to operate with. Like, I do like ground myself in a lot of Zen principles, Taoist principles, Vedanta principles. I just like can't get enough of any of that, right? But the moment I stray and the moment I go back to the conditioning, which was driving me crazy, I do falter. So it's like that going back and forth, but also like that unshakable joy amidst like so much chaos and drama. When I started feeling that splash of joy within me, then I realized, oh, you know what, there is still something to live for. And then that's synchronicity. And I think synchronicity follows me a lot when I do lose faith. One day I woke up, I have no plans. I don't know what to do. And I was doing Tai Chi in the park with a Chinese couple. I don't know where. So I think I don't have an answer for when it started for me, but I do feel confident that I have reached a point of certain stability that has made my not only the external life, or like your plane, material plane, is still at times showing or reflecting what's happening on the inside, right? Like your health, you're able to take care of your health, your responsibilities, your job, you're feeling confident, you're going after creative stuff. I think that's stability for me, but also knowing that, being flexible, not trying to like be too rigid in my plans. All these values sort of go together. It's not a inseparable process. It's pretty much like that, deep engagement with the world without deep attachment to it. So I personally do feel confident after listening to everyone and you that there is some sense of stability that I can enjoy. But I am having to learn a lot of big lessons. I'm having to learn a lot of lessons that I was never like, it's upside down again. Like, you have to learn to live without this idea. And I'm now willing to welcome that more without resistance. So I think last 2 years have been the most intense, but it's just about like putting in that effort consistently, knowing that there's no way going back, and that there's like, fine line or a very thin rope you're walking on, where you can go back to the person you were, but there's so much fear in where you're going. But you just gotta like, okay, well, going back means death at this point, like, death of the soul, basically. So that's how I'm feeling, and I'm feeling confident after hearing everyone, especially the terms like spiritual emergency. I think that definitely helps make sense of a lot of what happened in my life.
Wow. Well, thank you so much, Mahar, for sharing. I think there's something in your message for everyone there. Lots of wisdom there. You mentioned agency, and you asked here in the chat, how can we pinpoint when it truly started? I can only make sense in retrospect. So I've heard, and I have no qualms with this idea, which is that Kundalini awakening process begins when the spiritual seeking begins. So I would equate that to agency, right? Because spirituality is about our experience. So, looking out for ourselves in a sense, practicing our own agency on our own journey. So when the seeking begins, that could be the beginning, you could say, of your Kundalini awakening process as well. I've heard someone mention that. Of course, there are some caveats there. There's some nuances there. Does that mean everyone that's a spiritual seeker is going to Kundalini awakening? Sure. Of course. You know, you got to use your discernment, right? You don't want to just listen to anybody talking about this. Ideally, somebody who's, quite advanced on the path, for example. But yeah, I like that idea of agency, and using that as one of the markers for when did this really begin? Seeking, the questioning, right? Lots to think about there, Mahar. Thank you, thank you. Let's go over here to Kat.
Hi, Brent.
Hey, Kat.
Hey, guys. So I have a share, but it's a multifaceted share, and I'm not on my A game today, so bear with me. It might be a bit of a roller coaster getting to my end thought.
That's okay.
But the end thought came based on this conversation, and this topic is seemingly what I needed to hear. But personally, for myself lately, I felt pretty plateaued in my process. I think there's been some resistance on my end based on you're saying if, people with trauma, it's going to be a little more turbulent, take a little longer for them. And I do have a fair amount of stuff to work through. And, you know, I'm at about the 1.5 year mark of my process. Next month will be a year of actually knowing what's going on. So, I'm pretty proactive with like shadow work, meditation, doing what I can to surrender. But I've found that the further along I am in my process, the more challenging and uncomfortable and painful the things that are coming up to be purged are. And I think there's been a lot of resistance in that way of like, well, if once I purge this, the next thing that comes up is going to be even more difficult to like work through and sit with. And like I think about the stuff that I was challenged with, like, in the spring or like last winter, I'm like, oh, see, that was like child's play compared to what I've been having to deal with now. So I'm like, I don't want to get over this thing because the next thing's going to be even harder. And I'm just kind of like psyching myself out and really resisting and being unable to surrender. And the stagnation, I've been really feeling it energetically as well. Just be very flat, not taking as good a care of myself as I normally am. It's not great. But so that's just a personal share. But what everyone's been talking about, specifically when you and Colin were going back and forth, kind of comes into play my next portion of my share, which some of you guys know I'm big on like dream work and dream journaling and trying to kind of decode that and understand that. It's been very helpful with my process. And an image that comes up a lot for me in my dreams are hills or mountains. And I'm always at the bottom, so it's extremely daunting. And I don't always make it to the top of them, but I remember one in particular. I looked at the top, I was like, I cannot get up there. And then I thought to myself in my dream, I'm like, one step at a time, one foot in front of the other. Don't look at the top of the mountain. Like, just focus on here and now. And I think that's important for what I'm going through right now personally. Like, don't worry about the next thing that's going to get purged. Like, just get through this one. But I also think that's like a helpful analogy kind of just like for this topic as a whole, because we know it's such an ongoing process and it is really daunting. So let's not get overly caught up in like, the relative stability we're hoping to get for. Let's just focus on here and now. And it's already such a powerful process as is. You don't want to get too caught up in the what if or when or how. So that's the mental gymnastics that I've gone through the last however many minutes. So yes, I thank you all for bearing with me getting to my end zone little wisdom nugget from all my dream analysis.
Thank you, Kat. No, that was very clear. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, enjoying the journey, enjoying the process. Easier said than done when things are difficult and uncomfortable, but this is the way, isn't it? Right? The whole thing is about being present. So we can begin now rather than hoping for some point in the future when we're present, right? Yeah. Thank you for sharing. Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah, definitely easier said than done, but thanks for listening, y'all. Thanks, Brent.
Yeah, thank you. So Red Pill Queen is asking here, Brent, what did the Kriyas feel like for you? Do you still have them? So Kriyas can refer to many different spontaneous phenomena. I'll describe a few. In the beginning, they were very awkward and jerky and sort of tense, like spontaneous movements, vibrations, like spontaneous shaking. I would wake up sometimes in yoga poses and things like that, like weird yoga poses in bed and stuff. But I think since my teenage years, I've always had this like these like spontaneous like shivers that just come across my whole body, like randomly, quote unquote, randomly. Um, and I still get those. They're very, I think they're subtle. It's happened in front of many people, but nobody's ever commented on it. I just thought everybody has these, I think. So that's why nobody's ever said anything, but I don't know. I haven't really made sense of it. But I still have like subtle shivers like that. Sometimes in meditation, I may get some interesting things happening like this. But generally speaking, a lot of the phenomena I have, if at all, is like internal. So I'll feel like rushes of energy inside. The other day, I had a really intense week, poor sleep, really stressed, lots of stuff going on. And so Friday came and I said, okay, I need to just really just settle down and relax my system. And so I just kind of lay down in bed and I relaxed my system. And this one Kriya from the tip of my toe shook me like just like shaking out a rug that's like dirty, like just, shaking it out outside to get the dust out. Like that's kind of what rippled through my system. And my hand went up and all that stress just kind of got released. All that stress I was carrying from that week, just in one Kriya like that. So that was pretty interesting. So I still get them sometimes. Things like this happen, but not like how I used to, not so much super intense or awkward and things like that. So that's been my experience. I'm curious if others have some interesting things to share for Red Pill Queen about Kriyas. Olga's sharing here. I had a spiritual emergency in 2009 while practicing yoga nidra that caused immense pain on the sacral area. So I involuntarily suppressed it until a year ago when I experienced a very intense and beautiful rise. Guess I wasn't ready the first time. Very interesting. So that was in 2009. So over a decade later, almost 15 years later. Wow. It's interesting that you mentioned yoga nidra. Yoga nidra is sort of presented as a very gentle practice, right? It's a beautiful practice, really effective to calm down, to rest, to prepare for sleep, to relax. But clearly, it can also set us up for a very, very intense awakening process as well. So I don't think any of these spiritual practices are incapable of inducing a powerful awakening. That's part of my intention to sort of raise awareness about this because it's happening to more and more people all over. And it's really, of course, challenging. Red Pill Queen says here, I had Kriyas when I was in diapers and saw the void when I was 10, but the big awakening didn't happen until I was 33. Very interesting. So clearly, in my perspective, you've come into this life after engaging in some serious spiritual work previously, right? Having Kriyas when you were in diapers, seeing the void when you were 10. Very interesting. Bahar is asking, can someone also explain what Kriya is as a fundamental? So I would say Kriyas are the spontaneous expressions of Shakti through the system. So it can manifest outwardly as spontaneous movements, vocalizations, mudras, also inwardly, rushes of energy, sort of spontaneous induction of deep meditation that could be considered a Kriya. So it's any of the spontaneous movements of this power of consciousness. You can consider it to be a Kriya. I've heard it also described that all of existence is a Kriya. Initially, there was a still pool of consciousness. And then there was a ripple. And that ripple is a Kriya. And that ripple got so refined and sophisticated that it's manifested as all that we see and experience here. This is all a ripple in consciousness, all a giant Kriya. That's what reality is. All a giant Kriya. Right? So something to think about there. Contemplate on that. Meditate on that. All of this is Shakti, dancing, consciousness dancing. One giant Kriya. So when it happens in our own body in these obvious ways, spontaneous movements, you can know that this is what happens in the whole universe. It's all a spontaneous movement, spontaneous expression of consciousness. Got some friends here on YouTube. Jamal shares here, Kundalini almost killed me 12 years ago. I had an awakening that I could not handle that coincided with marijuana use. 12 years later, it's happening again without drugs, and there's so much fear. Oh, thanks for opening up, Jamal. I'm sorry to hear that there's so much fear. It can be very, very challenging and confusing, but know that fear can arise from not properly understanding what this is, which I don't blame anyone for not understanding. This is so unusual and confusing and far out. Fear can also arise to be purged and purified and cleansed and released out of our system as well. I hope you can find some sense of calm. Once again, another interesting trigger for Kundalini, marijuana use, right? So we were just speaking about yoga nidra, very safe, gentle practice, triggers a powerful Kundalini awakening. Now we're speaking about marijuana use, right? Marijuana is legal here. You can grow it in your backyard. You can go to the store. You can buy it in a drink, gummy bears, right? And people are having Kundalini awakenings on this, right? This is part of what I think is the reason for why there's an ascension taking place, right? All of these practices and tools and ideas are so widespread. So widespread. We're being marketed for these ideas. Can you believe that? People are marketing spiritual practices to us, yoga and whatnot. Very interesting times. Very interesting times. I think we're going to see a lot more people having these phenomena. Unfortunately, we're here to offer some support. Adorable on YouTube shares here, since you indicated there really is no end to Kundalini awakening, how does one know how long it takes? I started mine a year ago, and the initial process moved through my body so fast, about 2 months. Adorable goes on to add here, to bring clarity, I refer to the dark night of the soul and having the Kundalini go up my spine. It was triggered by a twin flame meeting. However, I had been a spiritual person my entire life, did yoga avidly. Interesting. So, yeah, like I was sharing in my talk earlier, you know, we can quantify it in terms of years. You could say 1 year, 5 year, 10 years, 20 years, whatever it is. But ultimately, we can't really know how long this takes, right? It's like asking how long is my life going to be? Like we don't necessarily know, right? Just have to go through it. Just have to go through it. And what's interesting is based on my approach, my passive approach to the process is we engage in very gentle, safe practices, self-care, being present, holding space for ourselves to experience anything that may arise, emotions, thoughts, feelings, sensations. We relate with God, higher power in our own way, whatever that means for us, right? Through devotion, through prayer, through connection, through reverence. Doesn't matter how long this process takes. Why? Because at the end, you're going to do the same things anyway. So it doesn't matter, right? At the end of the process, you're still going to engage in self-care. You're still going to relate with God in your own way, right? You're still going to practice meditation and being present and holding space for yourself no matter what's arising. So why does it matter how long it takes, right? Now and that point in the future, you're going to have to do the same things. So another thing to think about there, right? Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, same thing, right? Red Pill Queen's asking here, too much marijuana? Definitely such a thing as too much, for sure. Even if you consider the quantity of THC that's found in marijuana today, I don't think it's ever existed on the planet ever before, right? You don't find that in nature, 20% THC. Absolutely unheard of. Maybe wrong about that, but It's unheard of to find it on every street corner here in Canada until now, right? Marijuana, Mary Jane, it's the Divine Mother. Ah, Red Pill Queen. Yes, you're referring to Jamal mentioning that his awakening coincided with marijuana. Yeah, it could have been too much marijuana for sure. It's medicine. Can definitely have too much medicine. Let's go over here to Mahar.
Still discussing the marijuana take on Kundalini, right? So I think for me, the usage became chronic at one point. I live in Seattle. It's just, normal almost. I was very much impressed by David Lynch pointing out meditation versus something impacting the nervous system. And I think I needed to hear that because there's a healthy dependency, but then there was this unhealthy escapist dependency. And what was the reason, right? So I was able to sort of differentiate. So I went through a very long time of eliminating it completely. My life went from standard definition or low definition to high definition. But then when I reintroduced it, it was in such a different context. It was in a different, it was more social. It was more like, okay, we're using it to either relax or chill. And it was so little as compared to where I was previously. But I think I was going through a phase of using it in a more self-destructive way, for lack of a better term, and to numb myself instead of actually dealing with everything. And I think it was the chronic use, which almost killed me, that drove me to TM the next day. So I think it's a good reminder on the nervous system and physiology perspective, especially with edibles. We don't know how our bodies process it. But at the same time, I have also been so open-minded about other people's experiences. I think Gabor Mate also leaning into the use of psychedelics for healing. So I think there is really just that intent that I personally had to use to differentiate what the reason was, what the dependencies for. And that's where I am. I stopped using it completely again because I realized it gave me anxiety. And I don't drink alcohol either unless I'm traveling because I know I'm going to sweat it out by walking 30,000 steps. So I think it's just knowing your body, and that meditation really helps you understand why do you have that anxiety despite the meditation. Why do you have that depression despite the meditation? And I think alcohol and marijuana were both doing that to me eventually.
Thank you for sharing about your experience there. Yeah, I appreciate that perspective, right? Sometimes I've been through so much on my path I forget sometimes. So I've been being very critical of marijuana here today, but marijuana has played a huge role in my journey. One of my major risings took place on weed. And during that experience, it was super profound. I heard the voice of God, the goddess, say very clearly, never, ever smoke weed ever again. So that was it. That was it for me. So I definitely see the power in it for sure. For sure. Very powerful. And it can be very, what's the word? Very in alignment with Kundalini process for some people at certain points on the path, but not for everybody. And of course, it's a very slippery slope, right? Because what a great rationalization to smoke weed. Oh, it's good for my Kundalini process, right? So we've got to get really honest with ourselves for sure. Let's go over here to Colin.
Yeah, I was a chronic marijuana user for about 30 years. I definitely used it for my CPTSD. And I used it for fun. It felt good. It was the only time I could feel good. But when I quit using it, on a regular basis, that's when all my breakthroughs happened. Personally on the awakening path, And I still go back to it once in a while, every few months, thinking I can go there, but it just doesn't really work anymore. it works very briefly, and it just doesn't really work like alcohol, you know what I mean? But I used it so chronically, you know, it's like I find myself going back to it, and I always regret it, you know. And it's kind of like a do-over, you know. But one big thing about weed nowadays, and this is just speaking from experience and seeing how crazy it's gotten, like you said, 20% THC. I mean, that's considered low now.
Oh,
And
I didn't
that's
even know.
scary. That's scary though. No, 20 years ago, that would be considered high. And now that's considered low. You know, they're up to 30, 35% with, and that's not like infused, that's an actual just flower that's carrying that much THC. And I mean that can really send you over the moon. And plus with all these different variations of it, oils and all this crazy stuff that I never got into because I was just happy with some decent weed, you know. But at the levels people are smoking and the THC levels, and especially with edibles, they can go through the roof now. And like I would totally advise anybody here, like don't even go there. You know, stick 20% if you're gonna even go there. That's enough. You know what I mean? You're gonna have a great time, and you're gonna be able to get all the benefits. And I think you get a lot more benefits with less, you know. But I mean, man, it's even at that, it's so hard to regulate. There's all these different strains, all these different variations, it's too much to really be able to say, oh, I got a handle on this, or I know what the outcome of this is going to be. It's a crapshoot every single time. I mean, alcohol is far more, I think, I don't like alcohol anymore, but I think it's far more predictable. Weed is just, it's all over the map now. And, you know, if anyone's going to smoke, I would just say stay away from edibles and start at a very low THC content, you know. And sativas are going to be a lot more active, obviously, and indicas are going to be a lot more sedative. And hybrids, I think, I don't know, I'd personally avoid those altogether. But I mean, there's just too many variables to try to make logical sense out of it, you know. And I can definitely consider myself an expert at this point in my life. But anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. It's great insight there. I have a talk on Kundalini and weed in which I basically say, look, don't smoke if you're going through Kundalini awakening, don't smoke cannabis. If you're going to, though, engage in a ritual use of the plant. So you set an intention, you thank the plant, you tune in, right? You make sure that your set and setting is proper. You make sure that you don't have anything that's going to interfere with your ritual, with your spiritual practice that you're about to engage in, right? So when you do it like that, then like Nick B's sharing here, he says cannabis, when not used regularly, is a mild psychedelic. This is what I found. When you treat it like a ritual, which means you don't do it necessarily multiple times a day or every day, it's somewhat infrequent, suddenly you're having like the most powerful experiences, and you don't necessarily want to keep doing it because you've just got like a huge experience that you've got to process. So yes, it can be compatible. You know, if you ask me, ritualistic use is best. And it also then helps us to check ourselves, you know, are we really doing it for spiritual growth, or are we just kind of using it as our, you know, go-to escape, or we're bored or whatever it is, right? If you engage in a ritualistic use, I find it to be really incredible, but not for me, not anymore. I was told very clearly, like I said, never again. Never again. Let's see here. Quincy says he's been cannabis free for an hour now. Well, congratulations. Congratulations. Tell us how you did it. Let's go over here to Phoebe.
Hi, Brent. It's really interesting with the cannabis. I was never someone that was really attracted to it, but just a couple of times in my life, someone offered it to me. And it's actually when I first came down with the first level of Kundalini, and I was so sick and whatever, and they said, well, just try this. It might, it might work. It might help, pull you out of this. And it did absolutely nothing. And then when I had tried it earlier on in life, again, someone gave me some, and it did absolutely nothing. It's sort of interesting, isn't it? How your body just doesn't seem to have the receptors, and so that was curious. But I just wanted to share something really simple that I was taught by my practitioner. And I was having all these crashes, and just a flicker of the soul in the body, and so there's a lot of pain and suffering, a lot of damage done, heart, all the organs and everything damaged. And she'd say to me, just ask the body if she can, take the pressure off the heart or whatever you're feeling. If she has the capacity, she will do that for you. If that doesn't work, call in an ancestor that has the strongest, most healthiest heart to come and help you with the heart energy. And every time that I did either of those, I was always helped. The level of pressure on the heart would back off. And when I asked the body, look, even last night, I'm building up with lower back problems. And I'm thinking, oh gosh, this is going to get awful. My practitioner is away for weeks. And, it can get very messy. I can just barely walk, So I said to the body, please, if you can you heal the back problem overnight? And I wake up this morning and I'm fine. So everyone is looking out there all the time, and it really is part of what is already within that people just don't know they can use.
Amazing. Amazing. Makes sense why you didn't really feel anything on the weed. Not necessary for you.
Yeah, not necessary. No, it's like you can do it yourself. You just got to work out how to do it. Yeah.
Yeah. How to ask, how to receive. It sounds like you've got that down. Thank you, Phoebe. Very inspiring. Very inspiring. Sure. Beautiful.
Thank you.
Okay. Colin shares here, a couple of times I went to the dispensary to get a joint, and there would be a large snake lying in the middle of the road right in front of my car. Incredible. I don't mean to one-up you, Colin, but I have to share about something similar that happened to me a couple weeks ago. So I went on a bit of a hike by myself, not something I usually do. And it was in this big park, pretty isolated. So I just felt very comfortable. I was like a crazy person talking to God out loud, having a dialogue. And a butterfly kind of hovered over me as I walked for a little bit. Then I saw a giant puffball mushrooms like this big. I don't know, there must be elsewhere in North America, but they're about this big. They're edible, actually. So I found one of those, and the first time I ever found one of those. That was cool. And then I was walking through some grassy area, and I almost stepped on a snake. And so I just felt very much in the presence of God. With the butterfly, of course, representing transformation. The mushroom, an important teacher for me on my journey, definitely. And then, of course, the snake, just like Colin. Thank you for reminding me of that experience, Colin. Always nice when the snakes show up. Yeah, Noemi's mentioning here the medical symbol, the caduceus. That looks like two snakes and a pine cone with wings. They put it right in our faces. Yep. It's the dollar sign too, right? The dollar sign is the snake going up the rod. Peter shares here, my Kundalini awakening happened under the influence of weed. Very interesting. Maybe in another After Dark session, we can talk a little bit about weed. Maybe the next one though, I'm thinking we can talk a bit more about how Kundalini gets awakened. We'll look at some of the different ways and want to hear from everybody else how it got awakened in you. So we'll save that for next time, unless another topic comes to me in the shower. That's usually where they come to me. But yeah, we'll see. Okay. Shiv shares here, Swami Muktananda says that Shiva worship attracts cobras. Very interesting. Mahar says that she accidentally, very naively called a snake once through chanting for Shiva at 5 or 6 years old. Very interesting. Not in Ohio. As a young kid, I actually found a dead snake on a trail, and for some reason, I thought it was a rubber snake. Like that was the first thing that came to me. So I thought I found like a toy, and I picked it up, and it was like squishy, and I was like, oh God, like that's a real snake. It was dead. But that's something that's always stuck with me. I've had a few encounters with snakes on the journey. Very interesting stuff. Well, thank you all so much for sharing. So we've got a bunch of links in the description. KundaliniAwareness.org. Check it out if you're looking for a licensed mental health professional with Kundalini awakening experience. Got a directory there. You can check out my course, Grounded, Spiritual Emergence and Integration. If you're looking for some support on your journey, if you'd like to feel more grounded, figure out how to embody your awakening. The course is there, brentspirit.com/grounded. Check it out. We've got some free courses as well on my website if you haven't explored those already. We'll be hosting a Q&A meeting tomorrow, 2 p.m. Eastern. Happens most Mondays. You can register, once again, brentspirit.com. I've got some time slots open for some one-to-one support meetings if you'd like to meet with me on Zoom. There's a couple options for pricing. I understand sometimes people going through this process have a hard time with budgeting and whatnot. And so I have some flexible rates that you can look into there. I'd love to meet with you and offer you some support. Thank you all so much for all of your engagement today, sharing, supporting one another. This is a great meeting. Hope you all got some value out of it. Thank you all. Thank you all so much. And to all those that have offered a donation, thank you. Thank you. That allows me to do this. Thank you all so much. Let's get some sleep now. Until next time, much love and peace. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye now.